Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is always a pleasure to be in this House and to speak on behalf of the people of Calgary-Midnapore. And here I am today addressing the BIA. Madam Speaker, I'll start with an anecdote. Last Friday, when my husband picked me up at the Calgary airport, we were making the left-hand turn that we usually do in an effort to merge onto Deerfoot Trail, and halfway through turning, the light turned yellow. And my husband stopped in the middle of the intersection, and I turned to him and I said, "James, what the bleep are you doing here?" And well, Madam Speaker, that's what I have to say. What are we doing here? What is this government doing here? Madam Speaker, when I arrived here in 2017, there was the same sentiment that existed in 2015 when this government came into place. And I think amongst Canadians, although we were disappointed as Conservatives, we were sorry to see the departure of Prime Minister Stephen Harper. There was a feeling of hope and of enthusiasm, across the country. We often think of sunny ways at that time when the Prime Minister and the Liberal government came into place. And I will say, Madam Speaker, that these same sentiments existed when I arrived here in 2017. And I was actually just outside those doors being ready to be walked into the House of Commons for the first time. And it was still that same feeling of excitement and of sunny ways. But, Madam Speaker, I have to say, not anymore, not anymore. And this budget reflects it. Madam Speaker, this budget is a mishmash and a patchwork of legislation. Any individual reading through this content could not determine the goals, the aspirations, and the theme of this government. And, Madam Speaker, isn't that what leadership really is? Madam Speaker, what are we doing here? Madam Speaker, when I reflect upon the reasons, for this lack of direction we now see from this government, I would attribute it to three things. Number one is now the failure to implement any vision that this government to the Prime Minister might have once had. The second one, Madam Speaker, would be an unuseful and impractical adherence to ideology. And the third, Madam Speaker, would be ignoring the real problems affecting Canadians. And I'll take some time now to expand on each. So, Madam Speaker, when I talk about the failure to implement the vision, I'm talking about the sunny ways and the hope and the enthusiasm that this Prime Minister and this government arrived here with. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, when they have gone to execute these sunny ways, attempted to implement them into Canada and Canadian culture, it's been nothing but an absolute failure. We saw that, Madam Speaker, with the attempts for democracy reform. We saw that when the attempt was made to go to proportional representation, a 2015 election promise. It was failed upon by the previous Minister for Democratic Institutions, who is no longer in this House. But that is one example, frankly, of the failure of the implementation of vision that we've seen from this government. We saw this with the climate plan, Madam Speaker. We saw this with the Paris Climate Accord, Madam Speaker. I sat back there my second week having to vote on the Paris Climate Accords, and the fear and the division that it created in this House, which I'll expand upon, Madam Speaker, was for no reason, because these targets that we voted upon that divided us were never actually achieved by this government. So what's the point? The same thing, Madam Speaker, that we saw with their grand idea of planting 2 billion trees, Madam Speaker, 2 billion trees. Another idea, as I look around this room, I see nary a tree. So, Madam Speaker, they have failed on these climate initiatives as well. The third one, Madam Speaker, is unity, and I'll speak from this from two perspectives. The first is regional. They have pitted region against region in this country, Madam Speaker, needlessly creating division at a time even before the pandemic descended upon us. And of course, Madam Speaker, with the pandemic, pandemic. It was this Prime Minister who used inflammatory language, name-called, and attacked Canadians with valid concerns about the mandates. He actually rejected a Conservative motion to create a plan to roll back the mandates, which could have lowered the temperature, and he then, of course, invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in Canada's history, which we on this side of the House are still reviewing to this day. So created terrible disunity, not only in this House, Madam Speaker, but amongst Canadians. Secondly, Madam Speaker, an unuseful adherence to ideology. And we've seen this particularly, Madam Speaker, in two places. The first is in killing the natural resources sector. And as an Albertan, I take personal offense to this. How has this government done this? First of all, Madam Speaker, no support behind Line 5. Certainly, my colleague, the member from Calgary Centre, has talked, encouraged ad nauseum about this. Of course, in this moment, in this time in history, as Ukraine faces its most difficult time, the most difficult time we've seen in recent history, this government failed to pass a motion to get natural gas to Europe at a time where our natural resources could be used for good in this world. This government turned their back against it. Of course, C-48, the tanker moratorium, and, Madam Speaker, who can forget C-69, the No New Pipelines bill? So again, an unuseful adherence to ideology. We also saw that, Madam Speaker, with the mandates that still rest with us today. Madam Speaker, I will tell you, the parliamentary precinct and, frankly, the airports and airplanes are the only places now where I'm required to wear a mask. And with that, this government should be lifting the mandates and stop using this unuseful adherence to ideology, Madam Speaker, not helpful for Canadians at all. Finally, Madam Speaker, and I think what is most important here as we look at the ways this government has failed with which this and how this budget reflects that, is ignorance of the real problems that affect Canadians. What are those, Madam Speaker? Well, I'll tell you some of them, or a couple of them, certainly. Number one is, in Industry Committee, we saw the rejection of support to reject the lithium mine, which would have been very important for semiconductors, something that is becoming of increasing importance as we evaluate supply chains going into the future. And as well, I will say, in addition to that, Madam Speaker, we saw a government which was useless, unwilling to take a stand until the very last moment on the CP rail strike, which would have had devastating impacts on not only Western Canada, but all of Canada. Madam Speaker, we've seen this lack of action in labour shortages. The CFIB recently reported that labour shortages are back with a vengeance, and they found that 55% of businesses could not find the staff that they needed. Food and Beverage Canada said that they lacked 300,000 workers within their industry, and they have companies with vacancy rates of over 20%. And the government throwing money at this isn't helping. They need to address the backlogs that they have within their immigration processes. Housing, Madam Speaker, we hear about housing endlessly in there, with the average price of a home now reaching $874,100, a jolting 27.1% increase over the last year. With initiatives of this government, Madam Speaker, the first-time homebuyers incentive and the Share Equity Mortgage Fund failing terribly, I will say. And, Madam Speaker, I cannot talk about the failures of this government and how this budget and the Budget Implementation Act does not address cost of living and inflation, Madam Speaker. For the first time in 31 years, prices are up 6.7% compared to a year ago. Families are spending nearly $1,000 more a year on groceries and gas. Gas and home heating are costing more, and housing prices have doubled since the Prime Minister, the individual who is there, became Prime Minister. More than half of Canadians are $200 or less away from not being able to pay their bills or rent, with 3 in 10 already falling behind at the end of the month. So in conclusion, Madam Speaker, this government has run its course. They've received a minority not once but twice now. They just had to buy a mandate until 2025. When they got elected in 2015, there was a sense of hope, of optimism, of possibility. Madam Speaker, it's gone now. This budget reflects it. The Budget Implementation Act reflects it. What are we doing here?
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm not too sure what the Conservative Party is doing here. If you take a look in terms of what their performance has been like in the last number of weeks, I can assure the member that the Government of Canada, in particular our Prime Minister and Cabinet members, and in fact all Liberal members of Parliament, you will find, are here because we want to be able to serve Canadians. We're doing that in good part by budgetary measures that is going to have a profoundly positive impact on every Canadian from coast to coast to coast. Whether it's programs like the first ever national universal child care program, Madam Speaker, which is going to enable the workforce to be able to expand. Madam Speaker, to investments in infrastructure. There are so many gold nuggets inside that budget to ensure that we continue to provide hope for Canadians. And Madam Speaker, the sun will continue to shine as we continue to move forward. And I guess the question I would have for the member opposite is she seems to be of the opinion that Ottawa is the only one with mandates left. If she crosses the river, go over the bridge into Quebec, she will find that there is mandates for mask wearing in the province of Quebec. If she could maybe address that issue.
Calgary-Midnapore.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I will tell my colleague the sun has indeed set, I will absolutely say. And, you know, he talks a lot, talks a lot about, for example, you know, daycare. I wish the Minister for Families, Children and Social Development had been focused on Services Canada and the delivery of passports. And I think that is just another example of the way this government has lost their way. They've been so focused on their own ideology. They have forgotten about the needs of Canadians and delivering to Canadians, and they should remember that.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes, Verchères. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened to the passionate speech given by my Conservative colleague, and I found it very interesting and stimulating, we could even say. But, well, when we talk about C-19, we also talk about the budget that the government tabled not so long ago. And in that budget, what I found upsetting was the lack of action when it came to fighting climate change, particularly the fact that we've saw it later with the approval of Bay du Nord project, and the government continues to invest in oil and gas. So I'd like to ask the member who has just given this great speech, if she could tell us more about how we should fight against climate change and how we should get out of oil and gas.
Merci beaucoup à mon collègue.
Thank you very much to my colleague for the question. In fact, Madam Speaker, we have two MPs who are on it. The first said that there was no action on climate from this government. But I'm also disappointed, as I said in my speech, there is no action for the natural resources sector. So even if I agree with my Bloc colleague, I can say that action can be taken in the natural resources sector where there, in fact, is no action being taken. Although I agree with my colleague, I am disappointed, but for a different reason.
Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for her speech, and also we worked together on the disability inclusion file. So I wanted to ask some questions around the Canada Disability Benefit, and if the member from Calgary-Midnapore could have any comments around the missing Canada Disability Benefit in this budget.
For Calgary-Midnapore.
Well, thank you very much to my colleague from Port Moody, Coquitlam. And what I will say is I think we need to look at the sincerity and the intentions of this government. And I believe that she would agree with me on this. I mean, this government tabled that act the last week before we left for the seasonal break when there was an election about to be called. What does that say about their sincerity and about their will in implementing the act? You know, as strong as we may feel about this, as much as we may need to see something done for Canadians with disabilities, it really starts with this government. And the fact that they tabled this in the final week before we left with an election looming, potentially, financially, and that they have not brought it back, as well as not in this Richland budget of 2022, speaks volumes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member